We're talking about J.J.C. Smart's paper, Sensations and Brain Processes, in which he proposes to identify sensations with brain processes, that is, the mind-brain identity theory. We've been taking our time because Smart's paper makes several important contributions to how we debate the mind-body problem, even if we don't agree with his own solution. So far, we've been discussing the front and back ends of Smart's proposal, and now we'll look at the middle. The bulk of the paper is taken up with Smart's consideration of a series of objections. Most of the objections involve the imagined opponent arguing that Smart's theory has implications for what we can know, what we must know, or for the meanings of terms. And then Smart is at pains to explain that the identity theory only makes claims about the nature of mental states, about what they are, and that his theory doesn't have implications for the meanings of terms, or what we know, or what we have to know about brains in order to talk about minds or any such things. In short, the identity theory is a metaphysical theory, not a semantic or epistemic proposal. But there's one objection that Smart thinks is more serious, number 3, which in a footnote he attributes to the philosopher Max Black. The objection says basically that Smart might have convinced us that there's only one kind of stuff in the world, but it's still the case that he has to recognize both mental and physical properties. So we may have avoided substance dualism, but we still get stuck with property dualism. Picture the situation like this. According to a substance dualist like Descartes, there are two kinds of stuff, minds and bodies. Smart updates the dualist, assuming that all mental events are dualistic, not just rational thoughts. And assuming that although dualism implies epiphenomenalism, the two kinds of stuff nevertheless somehow remain in sync. This isn't Descartes' personal view. It's probably closer to what Ryle calls the official doctrine of dualism, or the dogma of the ghost in the machine. At any rate, Smart then argues that there's no reason to postulate two kinds of stuff, one of which does nothing because it's epiphenomenal. The simpler theory is that the mental events are brain events. Now, Smart and his contemporaries have a common sense view about ordinary things that you'll recall from ancient Greeks. There are substances, and substances have properties. Ordinary things are not naked or bare substances, they're substances with properties. This sets the stage for Max Black's objection to Smart's identity theory. Responding to Smart, Black says, "Not so fast. Maybe there's just one kind of stuff, but you're not an eliminativist. You're still accepting that there are mental states and brain states. These could be states of one kind of stuff, but it's still the case that we recognize brain states by their brainy properties, and we recognize mental states by their mental or phenomenal properties. So even if there's one kind of stuff, there must be two kinds of properties. Therefore, even if we've avoided substance dualism, we're still going to have to deal with property dualism." Okay, where does that leave us? Smart thinks this objection needs to be taken seriously. There does seem to be something to Black's worry. After all, the idea of a physical or bodily property seems to suggest that we can distinguish those properties from other properties, and if so, we might have to admit that there could be different kinds of properties, and some of those could be mental properties, right? Smart's reply is to accept that we recognize and identify sensations and brain processes by different properties, but deny that doing so requires that we think of any properties or processes as being inherently mental. Instead, he suggests, thinking and talking about mental things, or apparently mentalistic things, is just an indirect or abstract way of talking about bodily events. Consider what happens if I look into a bright light and experience an orange afterimage. Now, suppose the sensation of having an orange afterimage is identified with brain state 42. That sensation is caused in me by looking at a bright light just now. But it's also caused by seeing oranges. So when I report an orange afterimage, you don't need to think that I'm telling you about some special orangey mental properties or that there are little orange circles in my brain. Instead, you can think of me as telling you, indirectly as it were, that what's going on in me now is like what goes on in me when I see a ripe orange. As Smart puts it, some of our expressions are topic neutral. They don't pick out their objects in terms of the natures of those things, but instead in terms that relate them to other things. If I ask you to bring me the spoon that's on the left of the stove, you don't imagine that left of the stoveness is a special property that some spoons have. Smart's suggestion is that psychological terms are like that. And we all have experiences with these kinds of expressions. If my doctor asks me about the pain in my finger, I can say, "It feels like I'm being poked with a needle." And if you want to know what some kinds of anxiety feel like, I can tell you that one aspect anyway is like having had way too much caffeine. Someone who's very sad can say they're sad, but they can also say that it feels like they're going to cry. All of these are ways of picking out sensations in topic-neutral ways that don't imply the existence of any special immaterial mental entity or property. Typically, we do this by identifying sensations in terms of their causes and effects. And SMART suggests that we can think of all mentalistic language this way. So this is SMART's answer to Black's objection. In short, contrary to the suggestion, we don't refer to our sensations by immaterial mental properties after all. We refer to our sensations using terms that latch onto our sensations in a way that's topic neutral. And that's why the mind-brain identity theory doesn't imply property dualism. So that's the basic case in favor of the identity theory. It's simpler than the alternatives, it satisfies the desiderata for solutions to the mind-body problem, and it can stand up to objections. You should know that despite these virtues, the popularity of the mind-brain identity theory was short-lived. Within a decade, it was largely replaced by a competing theory that takes its inspiration more from computer science and less from neuroscience. That chapter of the story is our topic for next week. But before we move on, I want to make a few observations. First, although the heyday of the mind-brain identity theory was brief, it pretty much marked the end of the line for substance dualism. Those who were convinced that the identity theory was defective still accepted SMART's critique of dualism. So from here on out, all the serious contenders will be versions of monism. There's just one kind of stuff. Second, the demise of the mind-brain identity theory didn't amount to an embrace of Max Black's call for property dualism. It was widely accepted that SMART's idea of topic-neutral expressions did indeed avoid the problem. Finally, for reasons that are not altogether clear, many philosophers and psychologists didn't latch on to SMART's claim that our mentalistic language is already topic neutral. Instead, they set out to provide analyses or translations of mentalistic language into topic neutral terms. The idea was that we can scrub even our psychological theories of mentalistic terms if we can systematically replace those terms with new terms and expressions that are explicitly topic neutral. This was one of several motivations for the next theory we're going to consider, mind-body functionalism. Functionalism, as we'll see, is not one theory but more like a family of theories, or maybe just the convergence of several related ideas. That said, since the rise of functionalism in the 1960s, it's remained the dominant mind-body theory right up to today.